Okay, good evening, everyone. As Angus says, my name is Rachel Wignall. I work for NatureScot. I'm one of 7 geology or geo advisors in the geodiversity team. So we cover everything from geology, quaternary geology, geomorphology, coastal systems, river systems, and soils. So sort of range. And we advise nationally. So we're mostly advising our own local staff, but we do have opportunity to do outreach and other things, which I shall talk about in a minute. Right, so today's talk it was sort of a spin-off from a talk I gave to the Highland GeoSoc in January, where we discussed monitoring, and people said, can volunteers help with monitoring sites and checking if there's problems? And I said, yes, that'd be great. So today's talk is a bit of a run through about what we do for monitoring, what I think volunteers might be able to help, and what I think the Scottish Geology Trust could hopefully do to set up a system where volunteers can help productively and not have their data disappear into the black hole of NatureScot, which I think is what happens at the moment, if they provide us with any. So, okay. First of all, NatureScot's geoconservation remit. I say we do public outreach and engagement, which is obviously what I'm doing at the moment, which means I get to do lovely field trips to beaches and things. But a lot of our work is conserving Scotland's geodiversity, which includes protecting our nationally and internationally important geosites. Here's a very pretty one up at Forest Lodge in Wignall, SSSI. So how can volunteers help with this? Because this is what I'm asking about in this talk. There are a couple of issues with looking after sites, and there's the usual issue of funding and staff time and to undertake any remedial work and site improvements. And we also have issues with, you have to get the landowners' cooperation and all this sort of thing. But the other issue is, these are the things you can do in sites, like clear gorse and put up signs. It's a recent one at Peters Hill, which I'm very proud of. The other task that involved with looking after sites is actually finding out what's needed where, and that's actually a huge task. We've got 666, the magic number, features which we are supposed to look after on protected sites in Scotland. These are earth science features, and knowing what's happening on all of them is not exactly an easy task. They're spread all over the place. So what I'd like to say in this talk is, please, can you help with that as volunteers? Okay, what do I mean by our nationally and internationally important geosites? This is just a quick run through. I'm sure most of you probably know this already. In Britain, the protected sites, international, nationally important geosites, are selected through the Geological Conservation Review, or the GCR, and it selects GCR sites, or Geological Conservation Review sites. And each of these has a published site report, which is a scientific justification for its importance, and that equates to its inclusion in protected sites. So these reports are published originally by JNCC. Currently, they're published in the Proceedings of the Geologists Association as an open access. At least the Dalradian one certainly is. So these GCR sites are basically the best of the geosites in Scotland, England, and Wales. And there's a similar but slightly separate system of earth science conservation sites in Northern Ireland. All these sites are either internationally important, or they're exceptional features of national importance, or they're the best representative examples of key aspects of national geodiversity. So that's what we're looking at when I'm talking about nationally and internationally important geosites in Scotland. GCR sites, how do they relate to SSSIs? Well, the scientific justification for them to be in the GCR list also is a scientific justification for them to be in as a notified feature in a SSSI, which is a site of special scientific interest, which is our only protected sites, national protected sites that covers geodiversity. So the majority of GCR sites in Scotland are notified features within sites of special scientific interest. These therefore have legal protection of the SSSI system, which is good. Unfortunately, over 20% of GCR sites are not within SSSIs. We tend to refer to these unnotified GCR sites. These have no legal protection unless they're adopted by local authorities, for example, in planning, or they might be adopted as local geodiversity sites if they also have qualities for education. This is the not so good bit. These sites are not included in NatureScot's current monitoring system because they're not in SSSIs. However, for volunteer monitoring, I would be really pleased if these sites also would be included in the system. So I'd suggest perhaps GCR sites rather than SSSI features particularly would be the ideal list, because we really, really want to know what's happening on these, because we have absolutely no idea. And if there's an issue with them, there could be a justification for notifying them as SSSI in theory. So how do you find out where these GCR sites are in Scotland and SSSIs? NatureScot has a rather clunky mapping system called SiteLink, where you can find the GCR sites. Don't go to the SiteLink search page, go to the map page, because of some weird way where the data is pulled through, it doesn't come through on the SiteLink search, it only comes through on the map search. If you search for, if you tick the GCR site, go to an area. This is the area around Benmore Ascent, or you can type in a name. If you happen to know the name of GCR site, you'll pop up with the GCR sites in blue. Also not handy because it totally obliterates the topography. Anyway, but they're there and you can find out their names. And if you click on site details, currently nothing happens because the JNCC database to which it's most to link doesn't exist, but we're hoping to fix that. But at the moment you can find out where they are, and hopefully the system will be better in future. You can similarly put on the SSSI layer and find out whether your sites are in a SSSI. Okay. What's the protection offered by the SSSI system? Now this is a bit of a convoluted history. Started off in the original 1949 legislation as a protection against damage and developments like the A9 road scheme or quarrying or anything else that goes to the planning system. That's the only thing it protected against. Later, they're still included in this planning framework in Scotland, and we should be consulted. Doesn't always work, but we should be consulted if something is going to happen on a SSSI. And the legislation was expanded in 1968 and also 1981 to cover activities undertaken by owners and occupiers on sites. So this would be things like changes of land use, or if the owner or occupier wanted to dig drains or anything like that. There was a list of what used to be called potentially damaging operations and is now called operations requiring consent, which are the things that the landowner has to notify us if they're going to do on the site, and then we can give permission. So after 81, it was protected against damaging operations by the landowner. This didn't include anyone else though. Becoming an offence for anyone else to recklessly damage or intentionally damage a SSSI feature only came into force in 2004. So I know it's quite a long time ago, but the history of SSIs is relatively recently. That's a big improvement, because until then we couldn't say to anyone, don't go and damage a SSSI, it's an offence, it's a criminal offence, don't do it. So currently, if you damage SSSI, whether it be a biological feature or a geological feature, it is a wildlife crime, which gets some people's heads in a bit of a spin, that taking a fossil is a wildlife crime, taking a rock is a wildlife crime, but it is. And the police do actually take this seriously. They're getting their heads around the fact it's not just a strange one-off that occasionally happens, it does happen as regularly as probably any other wildlife crime, I think. So it's getting into the consciousness of the law enforcement. And I think it should probably get into the consciousness of ourselves as an agency to try and think more about how we can promote the fact that damaging geological sites is an offence. Right. Looking back at geosites, what data do we have about what is happening on geosites, what is needed in terms of remediation or actions? What do we have on general neglect, deterioration, and how do we know if damage has occurred, apart from somebody randomly phones us up and says the site's damaged? The answer is we do have a monitoring system, NatureScot's site condition monitoring program. It's been running since 1999, and we do have data on every site in Scotland, but that's one set of data in 20 odd years. Some of them we've been to more often. The site condition monitoring program is in Scotland as part of the UK monitoring program. So it monitors all features in SSSIs and European sites. As I said before, it doesn't monitor any of the unnotified GCR sites. So they're still a black hole that we don't really know anything about. So the program's been running since 1999. It's designed so that all 4 UK agencies can combine their results and present them. The idea was that we present them every 6 or 7 years as a report. Looks like this is the first one and the only one so far. to be presented. There are reporting categories, like this page here shows fossils, so you could report on what was happening to fossil sites or paleontological sites, and what was happening in igneous sites and quaternary sites, all different types of sites. And there's agreed condition assessment, so we describe things as favourable, unfavourable, partially destroyed, or destroyed, depending on what the damage is, whether it's reversible or irreversible. I think this one also has an unfavourable or unfavourable recovering. I think this one might also provide. Yeah, we go, unfavourable recovering. This is just the volcanic rocks page, and they do actually have more technical terms like igneous rocks, but for this report they decided to plain English it. Also presented what were the adverse activities happening on the site and what the management measures were being undertaken on the sites across the UK. Since this report is everyone's sort of gone slightly different directions, and people and the different agencies do different lengths of monitoring cycle, and they list their adverse activities differently. So it's a bit harder now to correlate things together, but the theory is there. However, we have insufficient resources to monitor sites frequently enough is the big crunch of the problem of the matter. This is a summary of statistics from the first 3 cycles. Now, by cycle, I mean, initially it was the time we hoped would take to monitor every site, every feature on a SSSI in a protected site in Scotland. So cycle 1, we intended to monitor everything. After that, it was just became the cycle, at the end of the cycle, we would report on what we had. As you can see, our ambitions gradually sank as it stopped being the in thing, and we got less funding and less staff time assigned to it. So it gradually descended from 100% attempt aim to 50% aim to 33% aim. In fact, in the earth sciences, we didn't do too badly. We kept it up at 64. And actually, in the first cycle, we did much better than most biological sites in actually completing 98% of our monitoring. So we have got some results, but as you see, we are desperately in need of more manpower out there to visit more sites. And this column over here, which says site check, was when in the last 3rd cycle, we decided really 34% of features being visited was not good enough. So we instigated a quick visit system where you didn't have to do the full monitoring assessment. You could just report on either part of the site or a quick check to see if there wasn't anything obvious. This is more the sort of thing I would expect to see from volunteers, that they don't have to go around the whole site. They don't have to do any specific on the site or check everything. They're doing what we would sort of call a site check, or perhaps I'd like to call it a geosite check. Okay, it would help, yes. Okay, how can volunteers help with our monitoring? Would they need to do the NatureScot site condition monitor training? Would they need to be expert specialists? The answer, I think, is no to both. I think we could get useful information without you having to do the training or be an expert specialist. I think anyone interested in earth sciences who visits a geosite or has been on a geosite visit and used a geosite for education or teaching purposes or research could probably do what we need to do in terms of provide us with the right information. So in order to explain why that is, I just want to give a brief summary of what we're actually monitoring. So if we're monitoring a feature and deciding if it's in what we call a favourable state, what we're checking is whether the current state of the feature meets the conservation objectives for the geosite. It's fairly basic. So what are conservation objectives for geosites? These are very general ones. I'd say the most basic and the lowest ambition one is that surveillance of the feature is actually still present to justify its inclusion in the GCI inventory. If the feature's been removed, destroyed, it goes. But that's an absolute bottom line of what minimum of what you'd want on one of these sites. Next up is, can the feature be used for an appropriate function as a scientific resource, an educational resource? If you go there, can you see the feature? Can you use it as you would appropriately want to do? But of course, there is a minimum for that, and lots of sites are better than the minimum. So the third and most ambitious objective is that there's no deterioration. So those are the 3, I would say, general objectives for geosites in order of ambition. So what would you need to do to assess these conservation objectives? What skills do you need to have? How might you go about doing it? The first one, the least ambitious one, I think would probably require expert knowledge. You need to know what the feature's about. You need to know all about why it fits into the GCR, all this sort of thing. And probably some investigative research to check papers, check what's there. And I don't think that's really what most volunteers will be wanting to do. But it's the least ambitious of the objectives. So I don't think that's suitable for really volunteer monitoring. That's more for geosite reassessment. At the other end of the scale, the condition of the feature has not deteriorated. Most ambitious target. Assessment requires, now this is a fundamental thing, it needs a baseline from which you're going to measure deterioration, because you can't measure deterioration without a baseline. The easiest way to define one is photographically, and this is what we actually do in NatureScot. We monitor from a baseline. And the reason for this is it's the easiest thing for a non-specialist with absolutely no geosite knowledge to do, is just look at photographs and tell us if they've changed. Check if they've changed. If they have changed, they can either decide, yes, it's bad or good or okay, or they can check with a specialist. But the problem with photographic baselines and volunteer site check that I can see is that you would then have to have a copy of the baseline. So you'd have to get hold of a copy of the baseline, some sort of suitable baseline, which means you have to be pre-planning it. So you have to download it or print it, which is what I've spent most of this week doing because I'm going site condition monitoring next week. And it's taken me hours to get hold of all the information, all the photographs from the previous monitoring visits, all the notes, all the information about what's been done, what hasn't been done, and pull it together to get a baseline that when I go out there, I'm confident I know what's been going on and I know that I can compare it to what's there now. So that would mean that geosite checks could only be pre-planned, and I don't think that's necessarily what volunteers want either. If there was some sort of website or app available that you could look at on site, that would be great. Pull it down from a database, but it would require 3D or 4G data coverage and a suitable device. The problem with baselines as well is that we do not have baselines in the easiest format to present to anyone. They are in a mixture of photos in our photo database, photos in Word documents, photos in PDFs. So it's a bit of a gobble. We can currently respond individually. If someone asks for the baseline, I could pull together the information and send it to them. We could try and collate and transfer our photographic baselines to an externally accessible database, which would be great, but I think it would take an awful lot of time and it's not available at the moment. So basically the best options for baselines for doing this sort of monitoring aren't available at the moment. So I don't think this is the ideal thing to ask volunteers to do at the moment either. So the last option of conservation objectives is to look at the middle one, which is the features in a state which can function appropriately as a scientific resource. I think this is probably the most suitable for volunteers. All you need to know is have an appreciation of how a geosite is used as a scientific and educational resource. I think anyone who's been on a site visit or been taken on a site visit will have an idea of what that involves. And so ability to assess whether the current state of the geosite meets the needs of education. I think anyone who's planned to go on a visit will know what they expect. If they arrive there and it's not what they expect, they can't use it as they intended, then they'll have an opinion about whether it's good enough and whether their expectations are met and whether it's functioning properly as a geosite. So I think this conservation objective is probably the key to getting volunteer geoscientists to help monitor our sites. So most of you volunteers. Okay. So if a geosite does not meet your expectations, what would we hope that you would do, and what sort of information would you provide? If it's like being trashed, gorses everywhere, covered in graffiti, what information do we need to know to take appropriate action on these sites? So basically, if you just told us there's graffiti all over the site, there's gorse everywhere, then someone's been there with a rock store, that is probably enough to alert us to do something. So fundamentally, that would just tell us what's there, would be the fundamental one thing that needs to be in the database, just something that tells you what's going to be there. But there are some things it would be really helpful if people thought about when they put the information in. One of these is reversible versus irreversible damage. Are you saying that we need to go and do something? Or are you saying that we just need to reassess what's there and maybe try and prevent further damage? What is it you're actually thinking needs to be done at the site? Because if you're there, you're much more likely to be able to make those judgments than somebody who receives it as an email or a feed off the database. Reversible deterioration damage, what can we actually do? So if you're thinking what needs done, these are such things we can do. So this is things of deterioration which is reversible: graffiti, tipping, and gorse, handily being reversed in that picture. We do have a remedies program, and we can reverse reversible deterioration through our remedies program, provided that we can persuade the landowner to accept help to do it. So far, I don't think there's been any cases where we've managed to wade in with the police and say you need to clear the gorse or rhododendron off your site. So we can clear tip material. We have cleared cars from quarries. It has been done. And we can clean off graffiti. It's quite a lot of elbow grease, but again, it can be done. We can clear vegetation. And for pollution instance, we tend to report to SEPA rather than actioning it ourselves, but it would be actioned. They take pollution quite seriously, funny enough. Looking at the pressures which have affected geosites, this is data from 2019. You'll see that a lot of the things that affect geosites are actually reversible deterioration. So invasive species, that's rhododendron, gorse, anything. It could be non-native or native. Dumping and storage of materials. Natural event tends to include things like self-seeded trees from plantations, so they're reversible as well. So quite a lot of what we're seeing on sites is reversible. What about irreversible damage and what can we do about it? So there's various different types of irreversible damage. There's natural erosion. We can't do an awful lot. We can protect it, such as fossil growth. We can record. This is an example of a tetrapod trackway at St Andrews, which they were taking a cast of. We can rescue in extreme situations, although that hasn't really happened in Scotland yet. Take it to a museum. Damage caused by people. Again, there's varying reasons for damage to be caused. It could just be that the farmer's going about his normal routine and his cows are trampling the dunes. It could be that somebody has no idea what they're doing, decides to set a wheelie bin on fire and happens to place it under a nationally important site at a Galleys Rock, which did happen. It could be that people should know better. For example, the landowner should know that they shouldn't be quarrying the gravel from their eskers, but they might do it anyway. And then there's the people who really should know better. So people who come with industrial equipment and dig up our sites or smash our rocks to pieces. So there's different levels of irreversible damage and different reasons why it's caused. Now, there's nothing we can do about irreversible damage in terms of fixing it. That's the point of it being irreversible. The only things we can really do are raise awareness to try and prevent it happening again. So there's two sort of strands to raising awareness, understanding what's potentially damaging. So you get the people who don't understand that what they're doing is damaging, and if they realize, they may stop. We had a campaign a while ago, 2015, I think, to try and educate undergraduates about geological fieldwork in Scotland and all the various access codes and responsible collecting codes that they should be following. And that's one thing which could help. Since 2004, we can always also raise awareness that to damage a site is an offence and that prosecution is possible. So this is a slightly newer strand to our raising awareness. As I showed you earlier, this is a sign from Peters Hill Nature Reserve, which was damaged quite extensively last summer and autumn in a series of attacks on its fossils. And we got having the Police Scotland logo is always good. People take that seriously, and I say the police are quite on board with this. So if you see irreversible damage at the site, you let us know. So there might not be a lot we can do, but we might look at something like a sign these days, if it's an appropriate place for a sign. So what do we need to know in order to take the appropriate action? We need to know what's wrong. As I was saying, just tell us, is it vegetation obscuring the feature? Is it new riverbank defences? Is it irresponsible collecting? What's going on? It'd be really useful if you could think about whether it's reversible or irreversible. What is the impact on the feature? Is it something that we can do something about, or is it something we just need to look at the wider context of trying to prevent further damage? And this is a bit more advanced. I'm not sure if volunteers would want to go in this depth. The things we tend to look at, is it affecting the physical attributes of the feature, the extent, the composition, or is it affecting the visibility of the feature? Sometimes it's helpful to think like that. Sometimes it may not be helpful. Or is it, if on an active system, is it affecting the process dynamics of the system? Sometimes it helps clarify what you need done to fix it, to think of it through like that. Other times, maybe not. So I would say this is an optional thing to look at. Really useful if people could think about what needs done to reverse reversible action, reversible damage, or what could be done for irreversible damage and to prevent further damage. If there's something obvious like put a gate, you know, to stop tipping or to discourage people from coming in. But these, I don't know whether it'd be worth including that sort of thing in the database or whether that's too confusing for people. The last thing, which I have put in yellow because I wanted not to forget to say, is that not only do we want to know if the geosite is currently okay, but it's also really important to look at if there's something that's imminently going to affect it. So if the vegetation is encroaching, but it hasn't yet really affected it, then it's still good to know, because then we can take proactive action and clear things. There's a nice quarry up in Huntley where we've done that. Clear trees, the Forestry Commission clear trees regularly, because someone pointed out it should be done. Right, how can volunteers provide information? Currently, they can email me, basically, or NatureScot staff. The information goes into our database, but this can't be viewed by anyone who's not in NatureScot, so it's not ideal, because basically your data goes into a black hole. So what I'm really asking here is, can Scottish Geology Trust instigate a database that volunteers could add their information to, so that they could see what's there, and also so that NatureScot could see what's there, and we could share it and work together to provide information, and also then other people, volunteers, could use previous volunteers' information to see what they've said about sites, rather than it all being a black hole when nothing comes back out. Photographs would be good and could build up our own baselines, always useful. I'm wondering if some sort of alert NatureScot function, so they can press a button and say, there's a problem here, it needs to go to NatureScot. And maybe we should have a section where NatureScot reports back to keep volunteers updated on what's being done, so they're not left in the dark about what's happening on the site. So those are my kind of ideas for what might be included in the database. I did a wee mock-up. Section 1, usual thing, assessor's name, assessment dates. You might go more than one date, so dates is always useful. The geosite location, GCR and MSA, I think that's the key one, because it would be nice to include non-SSI featured GCR sites in this if possible. Also local sites could be included. There's no reason why we couldn't have local geodiversity sites included in this. SSI name if applicable. For a location, say grid reference or what 3 words, but I was thinking about this, and sometimes they're huge, but what's really useful is to know where people entered the site from, because then you get an idea of which part they're looking at, where they are, and it is one specific point, so you're not wondering which point to give. So I just thought maybe at your entry point to the geosite would be appropriate. And also this is something we've included in our site check, to include the approximate area or proportion of the geosite visited. So you don't have to visit the whole thing, but you want to say, look, I looked at 50%, or I looked at 10%, or I looked at 100% of it. That's really useful to know. Main thing, is there anything wrong with the site? Yes or no? From your opinion, if you come to use the site, is there a problem with it? If there's no, then maybe put a little comment saying it's great, it's been cleared, or it's still good, or I can still see everything. That's great. Always useful for people to know the good things as well as the bad things. If yes, I think it'd be good if at some point there was a auto-generated warning for NatureScot to say, do something about this, you need to look at this, this report. Current and future issues, I thought it'd be good to make people, or try and encourage people to think about not only what's affecting the site now, and also what's affecting the site in the future. Something about irreversible damage, if that's not too detailed, maybe a screen on irreversible damage, either including advanced and super advanced stuff or not, and the reversible deterioration, again, including advanced stuff or not. And finally, a screen on the future issues, or we call them negative indicators, things that might be a problem in the future. I don't know if that's too detailed, or whether that's a sort of a level volunteers might not be put off by having to fill in. And also, all these screens should be optional. You don't have to go through the whole thing. You should be able to just put a comment in and submit it, because you want to encourage people to submit what they have. That was it from me. So yeah, I'd really like to know what people think. So I shall stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you very much, Rachel. I'll stop recording in a minute and then open the floor for questions and discussion. Just wanted to say before we finish recording, just a huge thanks to Rachel, because know that Earth Science staff in NatureScot and all staff in NatureScot, I'm sure, are very busy, and much appreciate Rachel giving her time tonight. I think it might be out of office hours, so it is appreciated that you've done that, and good to hear that you're getting out next week to do some site monitoring. Just a few things from the Scottish Geology Trust perspective before we finish. First thing I forgot to say earlier, but a couple of my colleagues are here. Emily Brown is Secretary of the Trust and Katie Strang is the Head of the Engagement Theme. So this is an area we're all interested in, indeed several other trustees are. And just from a Scottish Geology Trust perspective, I feel that we should all be kind of angry that there are valuable sites in Scotland that don't have protection. And that's not the fault of the earth science staff in NatureScot.
You keep trying.
Yes, they try, but it is really the fault of NatureScot at a policy level to not progress that, because it really should have been progressed. That's the sort of thing that the trust exists really to help give a national voice to the geological community in Scotland and try and raise these issues. And one of the things we have done recently in relation to the National Planning Framework 4, which has been in consultation recently, we've put a representation into that. We shared it with our members, but that was really pointing out that there's that anomaly. It's interesting that there's a couple of local authorities in Scotland that have, in their own planning systems, have addressed that and said that they really see geoconservation review sites as being SSI equivalent, but we suggested that really could be done at a national level to address this gap. So that's the sort of thing that the trust is keen to do. I'll just also mention in passing, Rachel mentioned local geodiversity sites a bit today, and that's a level below the nationally important sites, but are very important. We do have a lot of work has gone on in the last 20 odd years in some parts of the country, and it's good to have a couple of kind of key geoconservation people here tonight. Good to hear from them in discussion. But in the Lothian and Borders area, the local group Lothian and Borders Geoconservation is now actively trying to monitor these sites, and we've been doing a bit of training. The trust hosted a training program last year, which is available on our website, and that was addressing the local geodiversity site system and how we can designate sites and how we can monitor them. So as part of what the trust will do sort of straight away in terms of promoting this stuff is bring all this together. We'll share a copy of the recording from tonight and perhaps Rachel's slides, just put it in a nice, easily accessible place online. But the question really for the floor and for discussion is what next. Rachel set out really clearly the possibilities, and I think there's a lot of people that are keen to help. And I think it would be good to start doing that, to start reporting to Rachel if you spot problems at sites in particular. But certainly we would aspire to support the national community. We would love to see a project being developed. We do have the website resources that are a kind of natural home for this sort of thing. But the trust can only make progress in this area with your support as both as volunteers and as members. So a little plea from us, if you're not already a member of the Scottish Geology Trust, please do join and keep in touch with us. We very much would like to do more, and if you would like to be involved in that, then I think probably at this stage I'd be the kind of key contact within the trust for geoconservation issues. So get in touch with me and keep in touch with Rachel about this. And as I say, I think if there's enough interest, and if there are volunteers out there that are really kind of keen to get involved and want our help with this, then we will respond to that. So I'll stop the recording now and open the floor. It'll be good to discuss further how we might take this forward.